Thank you. So what I want to talk about is AI agents and what it means for government and governance, but let's start with defining terms. You've probably heard the hype, not just ChatGPT and chatbots, that's been with us a few years now, but the agents. Well, what is agentic AI? What is an AI agent? In very simplified terms, we can speak of agents combining what you might call the hands and the brain. So the brain is these incredible AI models. The stuff basically that we've had with us since ChatGPT really hit the scene in 2022, 23, which can analyze incredible amounts of information and also generate new text, images, audio. But this is just information. How does it become useful? When that analytical capability gets applied to digital tools and workflows. So when you use deep research, that's a research agent that uses an LLM to go out and search the web, or organize your calendar, or take meeting notes, or why not buy your, do your weekly shopping or drive your car. And so we're now entering a world where software doesn't just perceive and reason, it can actually act with relatively little human intervention for increasingly long periods of time. It can become useful. And we actually now have a way of describing in numbers that usefulness, which is probably the kind of the end-all, be-all of software performance metrics. How long can a piece of software, an AI agent, do a useful task without human intervention? And that number has been growing really quickly. So even a few years ago, you went to ChatGPT in 2022, it could basically write you a little poem. Well, now it can code pretty impressive software, and it can sort of work for hours on it. So by the way, this chart ends in 2025. Given the leaps we've had, this doubles every 7 months. If we were to draw this out to early 2026, we would be several floors above us already. So, and this is for software engineering. I can now give a 4 or 5 hour task in the software to something useful. And it's going, in other words, from being an intern, you can also give a task for maybe an hour or two, to already, a colleague that can work for hours or days at a time. And this has led to a new term, vibe coding, where people describe software and code it themselves. A Swedish company, Lovable, is the fastest growing software company in human history in terms of revenue. And they're one of the platforms that basically lets you vibe code software. And people are creating really cool things with this. And people who are not software engineers, simple things at home like a carb counter, or some advice on what clothes you should wear given the weather, or a program to organize your table tennis matches, or bedtime stories for your kids, or like I did in 10 minutes at the start of this conference, a live subtitling program that isn't perfect, but it works better than Google Translate. And I didn't write code, I said, code this for me in 10 minutes. Or another example, it's perhaps a little more political. We had a little situation in Estonia a few weeks ago. The parliament made a mistake, a little typo in a draft law that ended up costing the taxpayer 20 million euros this year. And I got kind of annoyed because they would have discovered this mistake if they just put the whole thing in ChatGPT. And so I thought, well, how can we prevent this from happening again? Not just, I take this draft law and put it in ChatGPT or Gemini, but we do it more systematically. So in an afternoon, the next day, I vibe coded a solution that went to the website of the Estonian parliament, took all the draft legislation, then analyzes it for internal inconsistencies and errors, and gives you a little report. And Estonia being a small country, like Iceland, information travels quickly, so by that evening I was in national TV doing a live demo. And I had, colleagues from various ministries writing back saying, hey, great tool, I'm using it. And what I want you to ask, and this is sort of the broad change bit, we'll get to the government bit in a minute, but imagine what our society would be like if 1% of teachers, students, doctors, scientists, journalists, parents, entrepreneurs were building this kind of useful software once a month this year. This is not like right now, you can start doing this. Here's my call to action, everyone here. Go create an account on Lovable, download Claude Code, and spend 2 hours using either one of those. And that's enough to figure out how these tools work. Now, what I spend my time on these days is thinking, well, how do we transform one of the hardest to transform parts of human activity, which is government? And you guys know all the cliches. Government in Iceland is fairly well run, but even here it's probably not the fastest moving part of society. And the ways in which government is broken are having a really big impact on the things that we're discussing here today. part of the backlash that we're having to the environmental agenda, to the sustainability agenda, yes, some of it's about the substantive, material choices we're making. But a lot of it has to do with the ways in which we are so imperfectly implementing these rules. Because when you give this sort of big change management task to how 20th century bureaucracy based on sort of 19th century industrial methods works, it's slow, it's inefficient, and it creates red tape, and people get justifiably angry at that. And there's a real economic cost to that above and beyond the costs we anyways should be carrying. And I think my message on government is none of this today is necessary. The technological capabilities we already have today, and that we're going to get better at and refine in the next months and years with agentic AI, let us do things differently. So we can imagine a building permit that does all of the environmental impact assessment and the alignment with planning requirements, and of course all the stress testing for safety and making sure you've coordinated with the neighbors, not in weeks or months, but in minutes. And these are already two examples at work today. I mean, they're not apples to apples, so Qatar taking 120 minutes and Ukraine for this one permit doing 15 minutes doesn't mean Ukraine's better, although since I'd say they are. But the point is, this is one of the big sort of blockers to doing new things in the world. It doesn't have to be like this. And of course, Ukraine has to work on this because it's going to hopefully be the biggest construction site in Europe for the next decade. But all of us in the world, we still need to build, we need to do things in the built environment. Or let's talk about the compliance with environmental rules, with sustainability rules, that is really several percent of GDP and that has caused some of this backlash. Well, you don't have to have all the reporting, all the accounting, all the auditing being done by human beings. We can imagine within a year or two a software agent that sits inside the data and the information systems of a company, that knows all of the rules and the norms, is running around itself figuring out, is my company actually compliant? Am I actually following all these guidelines? Have I done the assessments? Have I met these thresholds? And all it reports out to the regulator is red light, yellow light, green light, which is really all the regulator needs to know. And this has, by the way, the advantage if you're working in a sensitive industry, and also this reporting might have commercially sensitive information, you don't actually have to share that all out. Or let's talk about the disasters that are going to happen, well, that happen anyways and we'll have more of. I mean, one of the big issues with disaster response is you're suddenly overwhelmed. Imagine a world in which you can't just send a text message or a notification to everyone who's in a disaster area, but you can actually field the millions of calls that they're making to you, or you can actually send to each and every person a tailored SMS saying, dear Luukas, dear Birna, are you okay? Do you have clean water? Do you need food? Do you have anyone injured? And you can respond, and that information gets pulled together, and that's used to decide where does the helicopter go? Where do the paramedics go? So what I and others are working on is defining and building something called the Agentic State, which we think of as a comprehensive transformation of public administration where autonomous systems handle complexity and scale, while human officials focus on caring, empathy, strategic direction, and decisions that require judgment and accountability. This is being built in Ukraine today. The Ukrainian government has said this is the future of digital government there. And others are working on it. And I'm hopeful, by the way, that Iceland will be among those who move quickly. Birna, who leads Digital Iceland's here, and they're already working on some cool stuff behind the hood that I'm sure you can talk about soon. And I want to kind of end on thinking, well, what are the KPIs of this agentic state? Like, cool, some nice fancy tech, but if we put it into numbers, and here's a couple numbers, then these are things that Ukraine is targeting today and that I think are feasible in the next few years. To complete a citizen service interaction in 1 minute. More importantly, not just the existing service, but to launch a new service in a day. So you have a disaster, you have a new situation, you do something new, 1 day. User satisfaction, why not 90%? Why not like the best private sector services? And importantly, most things done without humans. But importantly, automating the 95%, what that lets us do is actually let the humans focus on the 5%, where we need the empathy, where we have the complicated situations. And this isn't just theory. We know this from existing government automation, that when we automate, we actually have more people to deal with the tricky cases and the edge cases. This transition isn't going to be easy. The legacy, the technological legacy, organizational legacy, the mindset will get in the way. For those of you who are more interested in the details, there's a cool 100-page paper on this, which goes into all the ifs, ands, and buts, and the governance problems and so on. The URL is down here too, agenticState.org. And what I'm focusing on right now is building a global initiative of ambitious governments that want to accelerate the responsible adoption of AI agents. I'm pretty optimistic Iceland's going to be part of that. And for now, takk fyrir, thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure.